good evening. Is my screen visible to everyone? All right. So in the last class, what we have discussed is, all right, awesome. So in the last class, what we have discussed is we have looked at the security model of Salesforce, and we have briefly discussed about the concept called what is workflow rules and what is its advantage in Salesforce. Right. The workflow rule is basically helping us automate certain things in Salesforce. Right. It is basically helping us automate certain things in Salesforce. Right. So as a part of that discussion, what we have understood is, what we have seen is, we have basically gone through a concept which is nothing but where a case is being created. Right. A case is being created. And the type of a case is electrical type. The type of the case is electrical. Alright. If the type of case is electrical, I want the system to do two things. First one is set the priority field value to high. And the second one is to basically send an email alert. That is our requirement. So what are our requirements? Setting the priority to high, and the second one is sending an email alert to group of people. We'll see who are those. For time being, let's think that we need to send an email alert. Alright. So that is our requirement. As a part of this automation that we are doing, we are making use of workflow rules as an option or a concept that is given by Salesforce. Alright. So how to configure your workflow rules? First thing that you need to do is click on setup. In the quick find, search for workflow rules. Right? Under build, create, workflow rules and approvals, you have this workflow rules. Right? Under build, create, we have this workflow rules and approvals, and that is where I have this workflow rules, the first option that I'm clicking here. Right? All right. So there would be a screen that comes up which basically talks about what is a workflow rule and what exactly it can do. Right? For time being, I'm clicking on continue. When you are clicking for the first time, you can always go through these items and you'll get to know what exactly the capabilities of a workflow rule are. Right? I'm clicking on continue here. The earlier screen that we have seen is basically giving you an info regarding what all things that you can do as a part of your workflow rule. Alright. As a part of your workflow rule, it basically is giving you an option of what all things that you can do as a part of your workflow rule. Right. Now, here are the list of workflow rules that I have. Here are the list of workflow rules that we have. In case if you want to edit any of them, you can click on it. In case if you want to basically create a new workflow rule, you can basically click on this new button which says new rule. Right? Click on new rule. Alright. Now, so the first step in defining your workflow rule is selecting the object. Alright. The first rule or the first option or the first step that we need to do in a part of defining our workflow rule is selecting the object. How would you select an object? It depends on where is your triggering point. It depends on how you will select your object is where is your triggering point. Alright. So you can ask this question to yourself where you can understand the answer or you can understand the step or the object that you need to select here. Alright. So my triggering point or my workflow rule should basically run on which object? It should run on case object. Why am I saying case object here is because my type field is on case object. Depending on the value that I have in this type field which is on a case object, I need to set this field, and the second option is sending an email alert. right? So you can ask this question, where is the action happening? You can also ask a second question or a kind of a rephrased version of that question that I've asked earlier, which is nothing but where is the triggering point? Or you can also ask yourself this question, which is nothing but where is the action happening? The action is happening on case object type field. Alright. So case object type field. So that is how you'll get to know where exactly you need to write your workflow. That is how you will get to know where to write your workflow. Alright. Now, my action is happening on the case object. Alright. My action is happening on the case object, and the result is also on the case object. Alright. So that is why I'm selecting case object here. Because both my fields are on the case object, that is why I'm selecting the case object here. Right. Where is my case object? Here is my case object. From the drop down, you can select the case object here. Right. There is no hard and fast rule that you have to write it on only the standard objects. You can write on any custom object that you have. It can be written, the workflow rules can be written on your standard objects as well as your custom objects. Right. For now, my action and response is happening on the same object. I'm selecting the case object here. That is my first step, which is basically selecting the object. Right. I'll click on next here. The second step talks about configuring the workflow. Second step talks about configuring the workflow. Alright. So what exactly we need to do is, there are like a couple of sections here. Right. There are like a couple of sections, 1, 2, 3. 3 sections here. We'll just go one by one. What is the first section talking about? It is talking about what would be the first section name is edit rule. What exactly we have in this section is we need to give a name to our workflow. We need to give a name to our workflow. Alright. Now, what is the name that I want to give to my workflow rule? The workflow rule name should be unique, plus it should also informative. So it should also be informative. Alright. 2 things that you need to keep in mind while writing your name. First thing is the name should be unique, plus it should also be informative, so that the other user or the other developer, if he's going through this workflow rule, he or she should be able to understand what exactly this workflow rule is doing without opening it. Alright. So what I'll do is update priority if, or I can say, or let me put it like this. What I'll say, update priority if my type is electrical. Alright. So this is how you can write your name. Just by reading this rule name, I'll get to know what exactly is happening. I'll be updating my priority field if the type of a case is electrical. Alright. So any meaningful name that you can think of or you can come up with, you can use that as your rule name. And in the description, in case if you are not able to add all the details that you wanted in your rule name, you can always make use of your description to fill that in. Alright. So that is your second step, first phase, which is edit rule. Right. Your second step, phase 1, which is nothing but your edit rule. Alright. Now, if I scroll down, there is a second section which says evaluation criteria. Second section which says evaluation criteria. Right. One second. Alright. So the second section basically talks about evaluation criteria, where we have 3 options here. What is the first option we have? We have create. And what exactly it says? Evaluate the rule when a record is created. Second option says created and every time it's edited. And the third option says created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. Alright. So 3 options we have. Alright. Now what exactly these 3 options are for? First option is basically telling the system that yes, I'll be doing certain actions as a part of this workflow rule. All right. So you will ask the system to basically update the priority field to high. You will ask the system to send an email alert. We'll call them as actions. We'll call them as workflow rule actions. All right. Workflow rule actions. Now system is asking me, do you want to perform those actions at what point? Do you want to perform those actions during the creation of a record, or do you want to perform those actions when a record is being created and every time it is edited? That means every time it is updated. Third one is created any time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. So there are three options given to us. First one is a self-explanatory option that is given to us, which is nothing but created. That means whenever I create a new record, I want those actions to be performed. If I want that kind of a action, if I want the actions to be just performed only when a record is being created, I can select the first one. If I want the actions to be performed whenever a record is being created and every time it's edited, that means during the creation I want that activity, plus whenever I update that record, whenever I edit that record and save that record, if I want those actions to be performed, that is where I'll select the second option. That is where I'll select the second option. And what is this third option is, if you compare option 2 and option 3, there is only this part that has been differed. Only this part and this point that has been different. So if we compare 2 and 3, the second option says create and every time it's edited. Third one says created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. All right. We have three options. Created and every time edited. Third one is created and every time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. All right. To understand this concept better, I'll quickly cover this section which says rule criteria, and then we'll have a discussion on what exactly this second and third option, what exactly the difference between the second and third option. All right. Now I have this rule criteria section. All right. If you have gone through our previous classes, there is a concept called list view where we have seen the similar script, where we have seen the similar section. All right. That section is nothing but if you want to define any criteria for a list view, you can basically define that here. All right. In a list view, we have seen this similar screen where we have asked the system to filter the records depending on the criteria that I have defined. Same applies in your rule criteria as well. All right. So here is the place where you will tell when your workflow rule should fire. All right. Let's say if there are 10 records that are being created, if I select this first option, I am asking the system or a Salesforce to run this workflow rule whenever a record is being created. Which record is being created? Case record is being created. Case record. Whenever a case record is being created, I want the workflow rule to run. Right. Now, do I want to run this workflow rule for all the 10 case records that are being created? The answer is no. The reason being, I have a criteria where I want those actions to be performed only if my type is equal to electronic or if my type is equal to electrical. Right? When I want this priority to be high and an email to be sent, when my type is equal to electrical. Right? If you want to set those kind of a conditions where you want to understand when your workflow rule actions needs to be performed, this is the place where you can configure that. I would repeat, if you want any criteria that you want to set in the system, this is the section where you can configure that. Alright. So what is my criteria? I don't want all the 10 records to be executed. As per our example, if there are 10 new case records that have been created, I don't want my workflow rule to basically execute all the actions for the 10 records. I want only those records which has type is equal to electrical. I want to basically do those actions for only records which has case type equals electrical. All right. Out of those 10 records, there might be some records which has type is equal to mechanical. There might be some records with type is equal to electronic. There might be some records with other. There might be some records with structural. Right. There would be different records that we might have in the system. All right. We might have in that system. All right. Now I want only few records to be executed. I want only few records to be executed. If I have that condition, what I can do is I can basically let the system know what is that condition that I want, so that only those records will be executed. My condition is if the case type is equal to electrical, that is where I want my system to run that logic or run that actions that have been configured in the next step. Alright. So far what we have discussed in detail, we have discussed the edit rule and the rule criteria. If you have multiple conditions, you can basically go ahead and update them. Right? You can go ahead and update them here, and you can define the logic in this add filter logic, just like how we did in our list views. Alright. So for now, I don't want this filter. What I'll do is I'll simply remove them. I'll simply remove this extra filter that I've added. Alright. In case if you want to add them, you can simply add them like this. Right. I don't want this one, so I'll be simply removing them. Alright. Now, so this is the rule criteria where I'm telling the system that only take these records and process it for the next actions or next step of actions that you need to do. But only thing that is pending here is this section which says evaluation criteria, in which we are clear with what will be happening for created records. If I select this created records, only system would pick only creation of a case records and it would process those records. It would not do the same activities when a record is being updated. It would not do the same actions when a record is being edited and saved again. That is called an update in Salesforce. Alright. Once we discuss the development concepts, that is where we'll be understanding what is an update and create, insert and an update. For time being, created is nothing but creation of a new records. Update is nothing but you have an existing record in the system. You click on that record and make some changes on that record, and you save that record again. Alright. So if you want your actions to be performed in both the things, you can select the second option. Now the discussion is about, now we'll shift the discussion between the two points that we have, which is created and every time it's edited, and the third one is created and every time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. Alright. Now, in order to make things simpler, what I'll be doing as a part of this exercise is, alright, I have taken the criteria as the criteria that I want to define the system as value. There is a field called value. For example, there is a field called value. Alright, and what I'm doing is I'm writing the workflow rule. I'm taking an example here. I am assuming that there is a field called value, and the condition that I have written in this rule criteria, or the criteria that I have defined in this rule criteria, is nothing but value greater than 100. Value greater than 100. This is the condition. Alright. Now I'll be creating some records. On an imaginary object, I'll be creating records. And there is a field called value in which I'll be entering some information. Alright. So now what we are doing is we are selecting the second option. And we are basically going through this process of how system would evaluate this information. Alright. Now, to give you the background, what would happen is if I have 10 records here, which is having case type is equal to electrical, not all 10 records would be processed. Out of 10, it would pick only those cases which has case type is equal to electrical. Those records would be taken by the system and would process for the next steps that we are defining, which is nothing but priority is equal to high and sending an email alert. So like I've said, these two activities we call them as workflow rule actions. Alright. So the point that I wanted you to remember is, once your rule criteria has been satisfied, your workflow rule actions will be triggered. Alright. For now, what you have to remember is, once your rule criteria is satisfied, your workflow rule actions will be fired. That is nothing but sending an email alert, updating the fields. Alright. Now, in our imaginary object, what I've selected is I've created a workflow rule, and this time I've selected the second option which says created and every time it's edited. I've selected the second option for the evaluation criteria. Now what I'm saying is, in the rule criteria I've defined that value greater than 100. Alright. Now I am creating a record. I'm creating that imaginary record with the value as 101. Alright. There is a record that I'm creating where I'm putting the value, I'm giving the field value to this value field as 101. Will my workflow rule will fire? Will my workflow rule will fire? Will my workflow rule actions will be firing or not? Will my workflow rule actions will be fired if I am giving value 101 in the field called value? So I would repeat the question. Now what I am doing is I am creating a record. There is a field called value. In that field, I am giving 101 as a value. And the condition that I've asked the system to consider is value greater than 100. Value greater than 100. Will my workflow rule actions will fire or not is my question. Will it fire or will it not fire? Did you guys understood my question, what I'm asking? Alright. So what I was asking is, I have a condition where it says value greater than 100. Now if I'm giving that value, if I'm replacing this value with 101, will my workflow rule actions will fire or not? Will this condition will return me true or false? Alright. Now, since 101 is always greater than 100, this condition will be true and my workflow rule actions will fire. My workflow rule actions will fire. Alright. So my workflow rule actions will fire. That means my workflow rule has been executed. Alright. I'm just writing this part which says workflow rule executes to indicate that we are firing that workflow rule actions. Alright. Now, we know that once creation, when I'm creating a report, if I'm entering value greater than 100, any value greater than 100, when a record is being created, the workflow rule actions will fire because 101 or any value that is greater than 100, this statement will be true, this condition will be true, that is where my workflow rule will be executed. Alright. Now what I'm doing is, since I have the record that is created with a value 101, I'm changing that value from 101 to 102. What I'm doing? I'm changing the value, alright, I'm changing the value from 101 to 102. Alright. So let me do one thing. Is my paint screen visible to everyone? Alright. Now what I'm doing is, I have a record, alright. I have a record in which I have a field called value. Alright. I have a field called value. Or I'll put it as field 1, just to avoid the confusion. Alright. I have a field 1. Alright. And this is the box where you will enter that value. Alright. And the condition that I've given in the workflow rule is, the condition that I've given in the workflow rule is field 1 should be greater than 100. If yes, then I'm asking the system to execute the workflow rule actions. Alright. So this is the condition, and if that is true, if this condition is true, I'm asking the system to execute the workflow rule actions. Alright. If the condition is true, I'm asking the system to perform the workflow rule actions. Alright. So we'll understand what exactly these workflow rule actions are. For time being, this comparison is little important. Alright. So this is the above section is nothing but field value greater than 100 is nothing but your rule criteria. Alright, this is your rule criteria and this is a record that we have. Alright, record that we have. Now what I'm doing is, now when I'm initially creating this record, I'm entering the value as 101. I'm entering the value as 101. Alright. Now help me understand what would happen if 101 is being given in the field called field 1, whether my workflow rule will be executing or not. So the condition that I've selected here is the second option which says created and every time it's edited. So will my workflow rule fire? Will my workflow rule will fire or not? So we are discussing the second option which says created and every time it's edited. Alright. So it would execute. The reason being 101 will be picked up by the system. It will go to your workflow rule and it will replace this field 1 with 101. Is 101 greater than 100? The answer is yes. That is where your workflow rule actions will be executed. Alright. So in the creation part, if I am giving a value as 101, that is where my workflow rule will be, or workflow rule actions will be executed. Right? Workflow rule actions will be executed. Right? So I'm keeping a tick mark here. Right? So we have looked at the creation part. Now the record is being created. And these workflow rules are executed. Now what I want to do, I want to change this value from 101 to 102. So what I'll be doing, I'll be clicking on edit button on this record. I'll be changing the field 1 value to 102 from 101. So what I did, I've updated that record, as in like I've clicked on edit and I've changed the value from 101 to 102. I've changed the value from 102 to 101 to 102. Will my workflow rule will be executed? Will my workflow rule actions will be executed or not? It would execute because 102 is always greater than 100. 102 is always greater than 100. That is where my workflow rule actions will be executed. So I'll keep a tick mark here. Now what I'll do, I'll change this value from 102 to 90. I'll change this value from 102 to 90. Right? I've again clicked on edit or edit button. Now I've changed that value from 102 to 90. I've changed that value from 102 to 90. Will my workflow rule will be executed? So what system will do is, system would basically pick that information, replace this 102 with 90. Is 90 greater than 100? The answer is no. So workflow will not be executed. Right? The workflow rule will not be executed. Now what I'll do is, I'll move from 90 to 103 this time. I'm changing the value from 90 to 103. How am I doing it? I'm clicking on edit and changing the value from 90 to 103. I'm changing the value from 90 to 103. What would happen? This time will my workflow rule actions will be firing? It would fire because 103 is always greater than 100. That is where my workflow will be executed. Only time when it will not execute is, this condition where my value is less than 100. My value is less than 100. Alright? Value is less than 100. Alright? Is this clear to everyone so far? I mean, is this concept clear to everyone so far? Is this clear to everyone? Alright. Now we'll quickly move on to the second option or the third option in our workflow rule, which is nothing but your created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. Alright, this time selecting the third option in our workflow rule, which is nothing but created and every time it's edited in the workflow. Alright, this is the third option that we have. So the earlier one is the second option that we have seen, and this time we are discussing the third option. While we are doing it, we want to understand what is the difference between the second option and the third option. Alright, now we'll do the same exercise again, starting with, if I create a record with value greater than 100, Will my workflow rule will be executed? The answer is yes, because 101 is always greater than 100. I'm just using the same rule criteria. I'm using the same rule criteria, just that I've changed the option from creator and every time it's edited to creator and any time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. That is the only change that I've did. Rest all remains the same. All right. Now, so I'm starting with value greater than 100. I'm giving 101. Will my workflow rule will be executed? The answer is yes. All right. Now what I'll do is I'll increase the value. I'll change the value from 101 to 101 to 100. Will my workflow rule will be executed? Will my workflow rule be executed?
Yes.
How many people agree to this one? Will my workflow will be executed?
I say yes.
Alright. Seems like everyone are agreeing to it. Alright. So if the second option and third option are working in the same way, what is the point of Salesforce giving you two options if they can do everything? Like if both the options 2 and 3 are working in the same way, then there is no point of giving you two options which is basically doing the same thing, right? It is not a choice that you are given with, it's a kind of a replica that you are given with, right? So if I ask you to select from two options and if I'm giving you option A and option A again, will you have an option to select between them? The answer is no. You have the same choice or the same option given twice, alright? Same applies here. The Salesforce is not giving you two kind of a similar options. There is a change here. Alright. What is that change? In order to understand how the third option has been executed, we'll revisit the first option and we'll understand what is making this workflow rule executed in the second option. Right? So if I'm creating a record with value greater than, if I'm satisfying this rule criteria, that is where this first option is being basically executed. Right? That is where your first option is basically executed. Now what I'm doing is I'm changing that value from 101 to 102. What I'm doing here is 101 a meeting criteria here? What is a meeting criteria? Meeting criteria is nothing but a condition that is satisfying this condition. Right? Is it a meeting criteria or not meeting criteria? It is a meeting criteria because 101 or 102 is always greater than 100. That is where it is called as meeting criteria. What is not meeting criteria? Any value which is not satisfying that condition, that is called non-meeting criteria. If you understand this terminology, our discussion will be very simple. Alright. So now what I am doing here is I am moving from a meeting criteria which is 101. That means 101 greater than 100. That is true, which is a meeting criteria. I am moving from a meeting criteria to meeting criteria. 101 is also greater than 100. 102 is also greater than 100. That means what I am doing is I am moving from meeting criteria to meeting criteria. I am changing the value from meeting criteria to meeting criteria. Alright. Now, at this time, when I'm moving from meeting criteria to meeting criteria, will my workflow rule is firing in the second option? The answer is yes. Alright. Now what I'm doing in the third option is I'm basically moving from 102 to 90. 102 is a meeting criteria, not meeting criteria. It is a meeting criteria because 102 is always greater than 100. That is why we are calling it as meeting criteria. I am moving from meeting criteria to non-meeting criteria. Is my workflow rule executing at that point of time? The answer is no, because 90 is always less than 100. That is where it is not executing. Now what I have done in step 4, I am moving from non-meeting criteria to again meeting criteria. So is my workflow rule executed this time? The answer is yes. So what we have understood from this exercise is, if my workflow rule is moving from meeting criteria to non-meeting criteria, that is where my workflow rule actions are not being executed. Rest all time it is executing it. Only in this condition where it says when a value is moving from meeting criteria to non-meeting criteria, that is where your workflow rule action in the second step is not being executed. Is this making sense to everyone? I've just given a different names to the earlier discussion that we did. Right? I've just given a different names. where I'm saying that if the condition is true, I'm saying it as a meeting criteria. If the condition is not true, I'm saying it as a non-meeting criteria. That is what I've done. Rest all things we have discussed. Whatever we have discussed so far remains true here as well. Right? So if I'm moving from meeting criteria to non-meeting criteria, that is where my workflow rule is not been executed. Rest all time it is executing. All right. Now, if I come to the third point, or if I come to the third option that we have in the workflow rules, which is nothing but created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. All right. Now, how it would behave is if the record is being created, initially, if that condition is meeting, if the record value is meeting the condition that we have, which is meeting the rule criteria that we have, that is where your workflow rule actions will be executed, right? If the value is greater than 100, that is where it will be called as meeting criteria, and that is where it would execute initially. Now, what is the condition that it would check before executing this option is, it would check if the record is moving from meeting criteria, from a non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. When this will execute is, even though if your value is greater than 100, it would check if my value is moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. I would repeat, this third option is different from your second option because of this reason. Your third option workflow rule will fire only if a record value is moving from a non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. Alright, that is the catch here. Now, if I go through this exercise, the second point where I'm moving from 101 to 102, is it moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria? The answer is no. We are moving from meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. So will it execute? The answer is no. It will not execute it. It will not execute it because we are not moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. Right? So this time what I'll do is, I'll move from, just to give you an example, I'll move from 102 to 103. Will it execute or not?
No.
The answer is no, because we are moving from a meeting criteria to again a meeting criteria. Right? So this time also it will not execute. This time what I'll do, I'll come back to the scenario that we have discussed earlier, which is nothing but moving from 102 to or 103 to 90. So this time what I'm doing, I'm moving from a value which is greater than 100 to a value which is less than 100. Right? So this time what I'm doing, I'm going from meeting criteria to a non-meeting criteria. Will it execute? In the first option itself, it is not executing because the condition is not being satisfied. Straightforward, option 4 will not execute. What about option 5? If I'm moving from 90 to, let's say, any value above than 100, let's say if I'm going to 105, will it execute this time? The answer is yes, because I'm moving from 90, which is non-meeting criteria, to a value which is 105, which is greater than 100, which is a meeting criteria. So this is the time where your workflow rule will execute. Alright. So compared to the second option and the third option will only execute if you are moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. Alright. So if you ask me how is that situation valid when we are creating this record, initially that record might have 0 value. That is where you are moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. So that is where initially also your record is being executed because you are moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. Alright. So that is the difference between the second option and the third option. Alright. Is that making sense? Is that making sense? Alright. So this is how you can understand the second option and third option. If you ask me what is the real-time scenarios where I will be using the second option and third option is, alright, third option is what you have to understand little better. Second option is every time it would be executed, so there is no point of understanding in detail, but I'll start with the third one and I'll give you the second option as well. Alright. So let's say if I'm creating a case, and if the type is equal to electrical, right? So what we are doing, we have basically agreed that as a part of this requirement, I'll be sending out an email alert plus also updating the priority feature. Right? sending an email plus updating your priority field. Right? I'm putting as SE for sending an email, and the second option is nothing but your priority field. All right. Now, if I select the second option, what would happen is, if I basically change any of the value here, it would be moving from meeting criteria to meeting criteria. That is where you will be sending out emails every time then a record is been edited. Just because your criteria has been satisfied, you will be sending out so many emails saying that the case has been created, and there is a high priority case that has been created. Alright, but actually you need to alert them once, and they'll be looking into that. Right? Let's say if you have alerted me saying that there is a high priority case that has been created in the system, I as a technician or a sales customer support guy have looked into the system, and I'm trying to edit that case to see what we can do on that case. Right? So now what you are doing, since I'm editing that case, this condition is moving from meeting criteria to meeting criteria. That is where you'll keep on sending the emails to. We'll keep on sending an emails to, which is of no use. Alright? Alright? So that is where you need to go with the third option, where what it does, it initially checks if you are moving from non-meeting criteria to meeting criteria. That is where it will send the email once, and even though the condition is satisfying every time, it will not send an email alert, because the second time it is not going from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. Right? So that is where, while sending an email alert, always choose for option 3, which is easier in terms of majority of the requirements when you are dealing with the emails. In case if your business is expecting email every time, that is where you can go to the second option. Even though the type is equal to electrical, you have already alerted them. If you want to keep on sending an email, that is where you can select the second option. Right? Third option is basically used for doing an activity once, and that activity will be evaluated and your workflow rules will be executed only if you are moving from non-meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. That is your third option. Alright. So when you use the second option, alright, in case I'm taking the same example and breaking it, alright, in case if someone is trying to change your type is equal to electrical to some other value, alright, and they want to set it back to electrical, alright. So that can also be done with your third workflow rule. So if you want that activity to be repeated every time, in case if you want to basically update that information, right, it can be like this. So if I take a new requirement, right, this might make more sense, right? So there is a case that we created, right, and we have alerted all the people with the third option. Now what I want to do is, once a case has been closed, right? So case has been closed. What I want to do, I want to capture the date time when a case has been closed. What I want to do, I'm taking a different requirement to help you understand what is this second option doing, right? Whenever there is a case that has been created, so upon the technicians working on it, upon CS customer support talking to the end users and getting that resolved, they'll be marking that case as closed, right? This usually happens in a real time also. If you raise a case with the customer care, he'll basically resolve that issue, and that is where they'll close that case. Now what I want is, I want to capture that date time when a case has been closed, right? Whenever the case has been closed properly. So what I'll do, I'll be creating a field called date time closed field to capture this information, right? Let's say for time being we have done this activity. All right, I'll just give you an information or how to basically do this activity. All right, so let's say for time being, think that using workflow rules we have populated this field with the current date time. All right, so this is done. Now, after reaching out to your customer, he has found out that there is some issue again coming up. All right, so they have talked to the customer support guy, has talked to the client, and he has agreed that the case is been closed. But after few minutes, he has again gave the customer support a call saying that the issue is still there, and he is not able to understand what is that fix that has went in. Right, he is again facing that same issue. Then what the customer support will do? They'll reopen this case. Saying that this case is being reopened again. All right. Now again the technician will go to that location, he'll look into that issue and he'll fix that. All right. Again, the customer support will close that ticket. Alright, close that ticket. Now help me understand, do we need to capture the latest case closed date time, or do we need to keep the existing date time? Do we need to capture the latest closed date time? Let's say today they have closed the ticket. Again, the customer raised an issue today itself, and the technician has took 1 day to fix that issue. And tomorrow the case is been closed. Tomorrow is the date time where it has been closed. Now help me understand what would be the value that I need to keep here. What would be the actual value that I need to keep it here? Will it be the previous date or the latest? Since the case has been reopened and it has been worked again, that means the actual close of your case is nothing but the latest date. The actual close of your case is nothing but your actual, the actual time that we need to capture in this field is nothing but the latest one. Alright, I would repeat. So the time that you need to capture here is nothing but the latest. The reason being, this is the old case information that we have. Since the case is being reopened, that is where you need to put in the latest information. Alright. So if you go with this scenario, that is where if the case has been already closed and there is some information that is happening here, that date time would not be captured. That is where you will basically opt for the second option. Even though the case is been closed and some fields are updated, the latest information will be populated if you are going with the second option. In case if you don't want to basically update the latest information on your case, when a case is been closed and they are trying to update some information, that is where you will go with the third option. Alright. In short, if anything that is doing with the email alerts, you want to just alert the customer or a person with one email alert, and it will not make sense to send out same email every time whenever a case is been updated. Alright. So this is the key difference between your second option and third option. If you don't want to do that activity, even though if it is in meeting criteria, if it is going from meeting criteria to a meeting criteria, if you don't want to do this activity, that is where you'll select the third option. If you want the action to be performed, even though if it is going from meeting criteria to meeting criteria, that is where you will go with the second option. Alright. So that is the key difference between your second option and third option. Alright. So that is how you will decide which option to be selected when you are configuring your workflow rule. Right? So that is your one of the important steps that we have in our workflow rule discussion. Right? Now, so what we have, so this is your second option and third option. Now, so let's go back to the Salesforce screen and we'll just go through what exactly it says. Alright. So I'm just sharing my Salesforce screen. Let me know if you can see it. I'm sharing my Salesforce screen. Is my screen visible to everyone? Salesforce screen is visible to everyone. Alright. Now, so if I go to the second option, it will execute even though if it is going from meeting criteria to the meeting criteria. So if I hover on the third option that we have, which is nothing but created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. If I hover on that eye icon, it says the rule is evaluated when a record is created and when a record that doesn't meet a criteria is edited to meet a criteria. What it is saying is, if you edit any record which is currently in not meeting criteria or does not meet the criteria, if you edit that record from that stage to a meeting criteria, that is where this record will be, or that record will be taken into consideration, and that is where your workflow rule actions will be performed. Alright, so that is what your third option is about. Alright, in terms of dealing with an email alert, you will use your third option and certain activities. And if you don't want to restrict yourself from the meeting criteria, from moving from not meeting criteria to a meeting criteria, that is where you will go with the second option, which is nothing but created every time it is edited. Right? Even though the case is been closed, and if I'm updating that information, then also I want to track that information. Saying that when is the actual work that is happened on my work. case. Alright. So here also, if my case is been closed, if someone is trying to edit that case to update some information, that is where I want to update this field, saying that there is some work that has happened on this case, that is why I want to capture the latest information. So this will happen, this date will update only in your second condition, but not in your third condition, because it is moving from meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. That is where your workflow rule, if you select the third option, it would not execute, but it would execute in your second option, which is going from meeting criteria to a meeting criteria. Right? That is the key difference between these two things. Right? Depending on your requirement, that is where you can evaluate these options to see which one will basically suit your requirement. Right? So you'll ask your business whether it needs to update, whether we need to update that field every time a case is been created, when it is moving from a meeting criteria to non-meeting criteria to meeting criteria, or it just should happen once. Right? With my experience, I've seen anything that we are dealing with the email alerts, usually we'll select the third option here. Right? So that is your discussion that we had on this step 2. Right? Step 2, we have looked at edit rule. Second option is nothing but your evaluation criteria, and third one is your rule criteria. Right? So that is on your step 2. What I'll do is I'll click on this button which says save and next. So in your workflow rule, this is one stage where you have to click save and execute in order to reach to your third step, which is nothing but you're configuring your actions that you want to do in Salesforce. Right? So far we were discussing about email sending and field update. This is the place where you can do that. Right? This is the place where you can do that actions here. Right? So this section is talking about specify the workflow rule actions. It is asking me to specify the workflow rule actions. Right? It is asking me to specify the workflow rule actions. We have in Salesforce two types of workflow rule actions. One is immediate workflow rule actions. Another one is time-dependent workflow rule actions. What exactly is a time-dependent workflow rule actions? It is nothing but workflow rule actions that we define would be executed after some time. Alright. So the actions that we have in immediate workflow rule actions and time-dependent workflow rule actions are same. The way to configure them is same. But what is the difference between these two things? The time-dependent actions are the actions which will be performed little later. You can basically give a delay saying that this action should perform after so many days. Right? You can say that this action should perform after this many hours. Right? So that is the key difference between your immediate actions and time-dependent actions. If you read through these words, you will get to know that difference because it says immediate actions. That means as soon as this happens, the action of setting the case type is equal to electrical, these actions could be performed. Immediate actions. Time-dependent actions are the actions which will be performed after the delay that is being elapsed. Right? So that is your immediate actions and time-dependent actions. So how to configure your workflow rule actions? There is this button which says add workflow rule action. So I've clicked on that button and that is where I see options here. Right? What is my first requirement? My first requirement is to basically update the priority field to high. Right? My first requirement is to basically set the priority field to high if the case type is equal to electrical. Alright. So in our rule criteria, I have defined what all records needs to be processed, and this is the stage where I need to tell the system what all actions needs to be performed. I have selected the bunch of records that I need to process. This is where I am telling the system that what action that the system needs to do. What is the action that system needs to do? Right. So what I am saying here is, since my requirement is to update this priority field, that is why I am selecting this option which says. New field update. If I want to update my field, that is where I'll select that option. If I want to update my existing field info, that is where I'll be selecting this option which says new update field. Right? So what I'll say here, I'll say that update priority. I'm just giving a name to my this one field update. I'm saying priority, update priority to high if type character. Right? I have given a name to it. Right? Just by reading this one, people will get to know what exactly I am doing. Unique name will be populated in case if you are not able to fill out everything in this name, you can always use your description. And now what I have to do, I have to basically tell the system what it needs to do as a part of field update. What I want as per my requirement, I want to update my priority field value to high. So that is where I have selected priority field value here, and that is where the system is asking me to which value you want to update it to, right? So it is giving me an option saying that what is the value that you want to update it to, right? So that is where I am saying the system that I want to update this value to high if my case type is equal to electrical, alright? So this is how you can configure your field update so that it would be performed by the system automatically when the case type is equal to electrical is coming into your system, right? So this is how we can configure. I have selected the field that we need to update and I have given a value that I want to update it to, right? I'll click on save. So what we have done is, so far we have basically configured a field. We have basically created a field update saying that if this action is happening, if the case with type is equal to electrical is coming into the system, that is where I want the system to be updated as, that is where I'm asking the system to update this field as high priority, right? So that is where I've created a field update which says priority is equal to high, right? Since we are on the top of the hour, alright, so we'll discuss this email alert part in our tomorrow's class. We'll basically create an email template and we'll use that email template to send an email alert. Alright, so what is the part that has been left out in our requirement is, first we have created a field update, and the second thing that has been pending is sending an email alert to the people so that they'll get to know that there is a high priority case that has been created in the system. Right? So we'll take that in our tomorrow's class since we are on the top of the hour. So what we have discussed is we have basically created a workflow rule and we have understood the difference between what is the difference between the second option in your evaluation criteria and the third option, and we have understood what is our rule criteria. Then we have configured one field update which is nothing but priority is equal to high. Alright, so that is what we have done. We have understood one immediate action which is nothing but doing a field update where I've told the system that this is the field that I have and I want to update this field with this information. Right? So that is what we have discussed so far. In tomorrow's class, we will complete the second requirement which is nothing but sending an email alert. Alright, so that is all we have discussed in our today's class. Like I've said, we have gone through the process of setting up our workflow. Only pending item that we have in our requirement is setting up your email and sending it to your end users. Alright, that is the pending activity that we have from today's class. Alright, having said that, I'll open up the session for Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to ping me, or else we can call it a day for today. So how to go to your workflow rules? By now you should be able to understand it. Anything that you want to do configuration or customization, click on your setup in the quick find, search for your concept that you want to configure. Alright. So this time the steps are click on your setup, go to your quick find, search for your workflow rules. It will be under build, create, workflow rules and approval process. You will find your workflow rules. Right. That is where you can find your workflow rules for now. Alright. Alright. So I don't see any questions that are coming in. In case if you have anything, feel free to ping me. In case if you don't have anything, feel free to continue. Right, I'll stay for another minute or so. In case if you don't have, we can wrap up the session for today.